had alluded to earlier, prior to what I was doing now, I worked at a company called On Media, and that was the advertising arm of MediaCom, kind of a autonomous piece of that business. We had our own office, but when I was hired there, it was primarily, I mean, it was a full-time sales role, but primarily selling TV advertising through cable networks like ESPN, Discovery, History, HGTV, to local businesses. I was there for about 6 years, and you know, as you'd imagine, just selling TV, things changed kind of quickly while I was there, even in just 6 years. And that, you know, as the traditional cable model started to and continues to kind of erode, they diversified what they were offering, kind of similar to what everybody else was doing. You've got radio stations, print, you know, companies. Everybody decided to kind of dip their toes into some form of digital marketing. On Media was no different there. And so suddenly I was learning a lot of new tools, which was great. The only issue that I had was in learning the competitive landscape better by, you know, having a good stable of clients and being out in front of people more. You know, you start to take on that consultative role. And, you know, I was telling people, well, you should probably buy us at the time, but you also should be using some of these tools that we don't offer, and you should probably be buying a competitor as well. So from early on, it was appealing to me to want to get more involved in not just selling, but also managing those processes and having an opportunity to general not just what we sold, but everything else. And so I had it in the cards for a while before I made the leap to try to prepare myself to do so. And it just presented itself perfectly in a opportunity I just really couldn't refuse in the winter of, I think it would have been the winter of 2016, because my official first day was on my birthday, which is January 5th of 2017. So the fall of 2016, one of my clients, which is actually Randy Keel Honda, they knew that I was kind of preparing in some way to do something different. One of those things being an agency. And they said, well, we're looking to make changes ourselves. So if you either want to work for us, that's one option, or if you want to be on your own and do this agency thing, we want you to give us a pitch. So it would have been somewhere around right before Thanksgiving of that year. I did that, and they said, we love it, but here's the thing: the ultimatum is you have to quit now, because we're coming into a new year, and we're going to need to hit the ground running. We have some big plans. And so after a pretty much one sleepless night, I decided that I was going to start penning up my resignation letter and putting all the plans in place. So it happened pretty quickly, and Flanker Media was born from there. I brought 2 other clients with me in the jump, but the idea was to create a full service agency that was focused primarily on small business owners. And I know small business in itself can mean a lot of things. I mean, really, I think they count it. Anybody can count it, what, revenues of under 100 million, 50 million. So it's kind of this gigantic range. But for me, a small business owner in the corridor, as it qualifies to my business, is anybody who still, what I say, wears too many hats. And that's kind of borrowing a term from my old boss. But it's somebody that still is involved in a lot of different processes, pulled in a lot of different directions. It's difficult for them to do all of them well. So are they still, you know, selling? Are they the HR person? Are they billing? Are they sweeping the floors? Are they doing a lot of those things? If so, I'd like to take the marketing advertising part of that off of their plate. And I suppose for my business, to define it even further, most of what I do is a lot of media strategy. So we kind of look at some of the fundamental things that they should do well, depending on what their industry is. And as of right now, I work with at any point in time, anywhere from about a dozen to the mid-teens of clients at any one time. Some of them are seasonal, but most of them are in very different industries. And it really looks at trying to do the fundamental things of, how is your web presence? Are you taking advantage of a lot of the free tools available to you, like Google My Business? Is your website optimized for mobile? Does it have an SEO strategy that at the very least is something that is going to make you competitive? And then from there, I kind of looked at my old job and the sales approach. I give them a lot of credit. They gave me a lot of good tools to start with when it came to, presenting myself to clients and presenting strategy. But when I started on media, they really pushed this marketing funnel approach, which was, especially if you're selling TV, the idea is you want to be top of mind, right? So if people are at the top of this funnel, and that being the awareness section of things, they're not aware of who you are, you need to get in front of them 5 to 7 times in order for them to remember you. And as they slowly get closer to making that purchase, hopefully, cross your fingers that you're in the running. I've kind of looked at it from the bottom up. So my strategy is, what are ways that we can get in front of people that are ready to make decisions right now and scale up affordably? And I think now with all of these digital marketing tools that are so hyper localized, there's a lot of opportunities that business owners just are completely unaware of on a lot of these platforms beyond just Facebook and Instagram, to really target on a zip code level, find people with specific intent, and then scale up affordably. So that's most of what I'm doing is from a media strategy standpoint. One, how do we make sure that you have defined your brand and your strategic niche, and then finding the right people and scaling up affordably from a really small, micro level, using all the tools available, at your disposal. So hopefully that's kind of a good introduction. This is my 5th year now. I started out as a one-man band. I now have one additional full-time employee, and work with several freelancers that have kind of become extensions of my business as well over the years. So it's sort of a team of 2 with several, 4 to 7 additional partners as well.
So what was your education background in all of this?
That's a good question. So I graduated from Coe College in 2011. And the liberal arts curriculum sometimes is, broadly defined. So I graduated with a double major and a minor. My double major was public relations and business administration, and my minor was actually in art. So I combined the ideas of all of that into kind of pursuing a marketing degree of sorts, since they didn't have a super defined one at Coe. Did a lot of artwork in the past anyway, so I did a little bit of graphic design at the time, and was trying to combine a few of those worlds. But I actually had a internship with On Media before I was hired there. And so that's really just what took me on that path, have an opportunity to do some campaigns for them as an intern. That was kind of the selling point for me. I can look back and see what made or broken my opportunity within kind of the advertising field. As an intern, I was actually working with Big Brothers Big Sisters on a nonprofit campaign, and that was what my boss, unbeknownst to me, was hedging my hire date on, was whether or not I was able to pull that off. And ultimately it went well, and that's how I got hired. But yeah, so that's kind of my educational history, is co-grad. Before that, I am from the Marshall County area. I went to a small high school called East Marshall. It's about 5-7 minutes east of Marshalltown. Small school. Found my way to Cedar Rapids, which at the time I thought was the big city. Seemed like I was really, really jumping up. Yeah.
So you're living my college dream, because I transferred from Iowa to Iowa State because Iowa State started an actual advertising degree. So I, of course, was going to work at Leo Burnett in Chicago. I went to visit there with an advertising group, and I was going to have my own advertising agency. This was, just a couple years ago when I was in college. So, but what I'm thinking, I think about those classes that I had specifically in advertising. Obviously, I don't do anything with advertising now, but how much it has changed. So I'm thinking of my college classes, and I had to do a campaign, which involved a billboard, TV. We had to make a very engaging radio commercial and a newspaper ad. I mean, really, that was like it. So, and you just think back to when you started with On Media, and I know your focus was the TV. So what do you use to gain the knowledge? Because people can advertise a billion different ways. So how do you keep all that? Like, where do you belong to an association, a group? What do you do to keep it all together? Because there's more choices now. There's too much.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it can be daunting. I know just in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a few of these platforms that have launched self-service opportunities for the business owners, Pinterest being one of them just recently, and I've started to use that a little bit more with retail customers. But much of it was self-taught. I do give a lot of credit. A former coworker of mine, who's now actually the local sales manager at On Media, Josh Paulson, he sat next to me for the majority of my 6 years at On Media, and was also a very entrepreneurial, spirited guy, had his own side businesses, and we collaborated on a lot of things. So while most of it's kind of self-taught, it's also, the product of having some really good mentors and, even clients that had dipped their toes in things and wanted me to get involved early on. But it's becoming, a larger part of my job, and why I envision probably needing to get some more help in the near future is, to keeping up with some of those things as self-service becomes available and more of them becomes more splintered. There are a ton of options, and I spend a lot of time right now. I think the newest frontier for me has been connected TV or streaming options. So as the proportion of the pie there gets larger and larger, I've kind of investigated some options for getting a more direct link to some of that inventory and trying to police it too. Because like I said, it is the Wild West. There's a lot of people that sell it. There's not a whole lot of people that understand how it works, is what I'm seeing. But I would say, it's funny that you say the campaigns that you were building in that class, TV, radio, billboards, those are all still relevant too. They still exist. They have a place. A lot of my clients still buy them. So I think a big competitive advantage for me thus far is that I do have enough of a background in kind of both worlds that does probably set me apart a little bit in this area, and that I have a pretty extensive understanding of the traditional media landscape, how to buy TV, radio, billboards, and then some of the digital tools, or most of the digital tools as well. So I'm not going to say I know how to do everything perfectly, but from like a media buying standpoint, I think that's kind of where my expertise is.
Hey Jordan, I got a couple of questions. With the first one, you said you were dealing with Randy Cole, the Honda dealer. Did you have anything to do with the TV ads where they're just total silence?
I can't take credit for that concept. That preceded me.
It drives me nuts, but I love it, right? Because every time it comes on, I have to look up at the TV because I think something's gone wrong, because it's just silence, right? And you're not used to silence. So it's brilliant from that way, but it's just so annoying.
Yeah, it's very polarizing. Either you think it's genius or you think it's the dumbest thing.
It's a bit of both, I think. Yeah. So my second question is a little. I hear a lot about like local SEO.
Mhm.
And I don't really understand what that means and how you kind of implement those sorts of strategies.
Yeah, so I think as Google's algorithm gets more and more complex and they're able to really dial down to the intent of someone using, localized keywords, even voice search now, with people that, are looking for, restaurants near me, whatever it is, you're starting to see, and I think especially with the Google My Business profile in the last 2 years, that's added a lot more features. You're seeing opportunities and opportunities for business owners that are proactive in finding ways to make sure that they have the most relevant information possible presented to people that live within, their zip code or within a short radius. So I guess the short answer to that is, yeah, there are opportunities for you to really own your neighborhood if you're aware of them. Whereas before, I think you were subject to competing more fiercely with bigger brands, even on a local level. Google's tried to make sure that that you can kind of own turf by being more relevant within the community that you serve, rather than needing to fight Amazon or Pizza Hut or whoever on a local level.
So does that mean, like from websites and those sorts of things, a lot of mentions of, like local cities and local areas, or is it something different?
Yeah, and being active, with there's a few different theories on, every time that there's a Google update, it feels like the goalposts change. And I will say that SEO, I'm probably, at a corporal level. I'm not necessarily a general there, but yeah, making sure that all of your possible, listings are consistent locally, making sure that you're active on your Google My Business profile and listing all of the possible, things that you offer. Yeah, making sure that your website's optimized for, localized keywords, even down to, having it optimized for, kind of schema markup or, other kind of like meta tags and things of that nature. There's kind of, those approaches have been around a long time, but I think when you're talking about the business owners that I work with, most of what I just mentioned is almost never on their radar.
Okay.
So yeah, it's really just following the fundamentals and trying to check off all those boxes and make sure. A lot of times that we do have a plan in place. I think another thing that happens too is there's a lot of ambition early on to want to do all of these things, whether it's the marketing ideas, themselves. We'll put maybe a social plan in place or an SEO plan in place. We're going to write so many posts that are relevant to this and try to get them out there. You do it for a year, then what happens? Usually falls off. So
cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I had a question. I think, as a smaller agency, you can't be all things to all people, and be that, the large ones like that were talked about before. But when you're kind of touching on some of these points, but I'd be curious if you did a like a SWOT analysis on your business, where do you see those strengths and, and then some of your weaknesses, because that can help you zero in more on the types of businesses that you can be most successful in, and make the most, provide the most return on investment for that potential business owner.
Yeah. So I guess some of those strengths I've outlined a little bit, just the opportunity to help them, get a handle on some of those fundamentals, and from a strategic standpoint, like bring everything together and put a plan that both of us can follow. I know from a resource standpoint, some of the businesses that I work with are so small, I might just help them with one thing, because at that time, I feel like with the budget that they've given me, that's the fundamental starting point. And if they are growing, some of them, their limitation really becomes an employee at that point. There's a few of those that I work with. That's probably the next step for them. They just need to hire the right person before we can do anything else. So from that point, there are some steps that I typically will follow, not again and again, but kind of come up regularly. And one of those is, once we get past the, is your website in a good place? Do we have all these brand messages of your strategy as a brand? Is that all put together? Search ads sometimes become a great starter, especially if you identify within a niche category that, I'm just organically not really competing well for a handful of keywords that get a lot of traffic. Let's get out there in front of people right now that are searching for these things and try to win bids if it makes sense and there's low competition. So that sometimes can be a fundamental starting point for them. When it comes to weaknesses, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that we're a fairly small business in that, when you're talking about, maybe a larger brand that sometimes just needs manpower thrown at it, there are going to be limitations in just the amount of hours that I can dedicate to any one project in a week. So I'm trying to think of a good example, but if a company has several different departments, if they're running several different campaigns at once that require a lot of interaction and management, things of those nature, I would say that it would be more difficult to, at this time, to take on some of those moving pieces all at once and maybe the amount of time that they want. So that's why I definitely try to identify those too many hat business owners, because they're still in that growth phase. Most of the people I work with are somewhat established, but maybe plateauing, and they're not exactly sure why. So we identify if that's a marketing advertising issue or something else. Yeah, hopefully that answers a question.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Do you then, just as one follow-up, it seems like your strength is figuring out the right medium for them to be advertising and how to reach their audience. What do you do if they really have like no branding and like maybe some just made up like logo that they thought was okay, but really you can look at it and go, no, are you then utilizing some freelancers and or yourself to help them really like figure out their brand and look a little snazzier, or what do you do there?
Yeah, so I am not the video producer. So the graphic design and the video production, those are my freelance connections. My involvement there, I would say my strength is in writing typically. So I'll be the storyboard writer and copywriter. And I kind of general those projects as well, sort of the director role. I try to keep it as probably not as nearly as updated as it needs to be, because I know there are a lot of projects that have done recently that aren't there, but my agency YouTube channel is usually somewhat up to date with a lot of those video projects specifically. I'm in the in the process of a web redesign as well. But yeah, so I'm a lot of times involved in that process. Just depends on the willingness of them to be open to new ideas and spend money on those ideas. Those can be tough hurdles. But I've worked with a few. Another client of mine is Hope Hearing and Tinnitus Center in Hiawatha. Dr. Kellogg there, I was lucky to have the opportunity to really help her build everything from the ground up before she opened. So that was an awesome project, and building a brand, the tagline, the look, the feel of roughly everything in partnership with those freelancers. And I thought that it turned out beautifully. It doesn't hurt that she does a great job on camera too. If you've seen any of her commercials.
Yeah, she's gorgeous.
Well, she's a great
and super nice.
Yeah,
no, I know her through some mutual friends. Yeah, I know her through some mutual friends. And when I saw her on your thing, I was like, oh, how do they know each other? How did this one come about? Which is kind of my next question. How do you find clients? How do you advertise yourself?
Well, I've been pretty fortunate. Like I said, in the beginning, there were some clients that kind of came with me. More than just Randy Keel, there were a few others that knew I wanted to make that jump. And so that made it much less scary and also profitable from day one. I have yet to take any loans, out for my business up to this point, which is pretty rare. So I've been fortunate there, but it's been these weird peaks and valleys, these waves of activity. And I'm kind of now with the hiring, his name's Garrett Laffler, is an account manager role for me now. As I slowly get him more involved in the active management of some of the campaigns, then I'll be more in that client-facing sales role again. But it went from bringing some of the clients on, taking on that workload, and then I joined a network group. So I'm part of the Corridor Business Builders, CVB. That group has been amazing. There's about 16 to 18 people at any one time that are part of that group, and the connections there have actually opened a lot of doors for me. But some of them have just been cold calls. I came from a world of cold calls on media, as you, Michelle, as you know, Julie, as you know. I think I probably set up appointments on cold calls with both of you. So it's a skill. It's something that a lot of people don't want to do. And I think.
Don't you think everybody should have to? Because I sold Yellow Page advertising back in the day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It is a lesson. I mean, it really is, especially when you go and open your own business.
Rejection is definitely something everyone needs to experience.
Right. I mean, it's not fun, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself and about those social dynamics, and I didn't have the same sales approach as some of my former colleagues. A lot of them were, they were just really nose to the grindstone. They got in there. I just never really had like that killer instinct when it came to cold calling. I was much more of a identify a handful of people and really try to hone in on who they were and get a sense for the business that they run, and try to approach that call with a lot of preparation. That wasn't always, my bosses weren't always a fan of that approach. They were very much the numbers over time take care of themselves. You call 100 people, you get 10 appointments, and 2 of those people sell kind of approach. But I definitely, using the experience from a lot of cold calls, a lot of failed cold calls, and then preparing myself for the successful ones. I think over time, probably a third of my account list is so far is from that method. So.
Okay, so here's the most hated interview question. Your greatest success and your worst failure.
Man. Yeah, that's tough. The greatest success is probably a combination of 2 things, and really both of them happened within the last 2 years. I would say that helping Dr. Kellogg's clinic was a big one, just because of how quickly it's grown. Most of that is credit to her, but I think everything that we built just really resonated quickly. And it actually got to the point there for a while where we were kind of having to hold back. It was a good problem to have, where we decided that things were maybe going a little too fast early on, and we had to kind of pull back those expectations. But the other one too, with Randy Keel Honda, the timing and making that switch and really having them be responsible for helping me get things started, and being a part of their new build out on Edgewood Road. You talk about a client who truly is the full service model. They were buying all of the things that you mentioned, and pretty much a majority of those local, platforms that we talk about too. So that launch was a huge undertaking, and that they were buying billboards and TV and radio and Facebook ads, and we were doing everything down to we even did, we're using Snapchat for a while. I mean, it was very comprehensive, and so I would say so far this year, last month, they broke their all-time sales record. shattered it, and I think they're on pace to do it again this month. Part of that's just a bigger facility, but I would say that's a big success story. The biggest shortcoming up to this point, I mean, there have been some big clients that I pitched that just never came through. That's to be expected, but I'm trying to think if there was ever one. I've been pretty fortunate to avoid, anything too big in that arena, but seems like a cop out to not have an apparent shortcoming.
No,
Pretty lucky
listen,
so
it's
far.
a hard question because we all look at that differently. So it could be, yeah, I really wanted that particular client and it's going to happen, or you plan something, you hoped it was going to go great, and and it didn't. But
well, here's one thing actually. So I do have one thing that's been gnawing at me, and that is there are times where I feel that like I said, I'm in the process of a website redesign. When it comes to my own marketing strategy, because up to this point, I've been fortunate to have some great referrals. I don't currently present myself in the way that I would like. As far as my website goes, as far as even, I've produced a few videos for myself. I'm still in the process of trying to even enhance my own image, which seems a little bit hypocritical when you're talking about doing this for other people, but I've definitely put everyone else's needs before my own up to this point. So that's probably it.
It's the same with a roofer always has the worst roofs, a painter has the worst painted houses. Yeah. I mean, it's just normal, right? That's the way it happens.
Yeah, definitely the case.
So looking at your website, which I think is quite divine, so I don't know why you're changing it. I read what the name of your business means.
Yes.
So how did you decide on it?
Yeah. I had played around with a few different concepts. The one thing that I do get asked a lot about the business too is if I'm some sort of good chess player, and I wish I was. I'm a pretty mediocre chess player.
I can play it also.
But yeah, I guess the definition of flanking in general from a strategic standpoint is the attack or defense of an advantageous position. And so as applying that to a small business owner, it's really trying to find opportunities on a local level that, for better or worse term, that you could exploit that are available. So my tagline is attack opportunity. When I run that consultative approach, the first couple meetings that we have, I gather information from them and then present where I find the opportunities using that entire toolbox. So that's really where it came from. I had hand drawn the logo, and then a friend of mine, put it together for me. But it's actually a combination of two things. The chess piece is somewhat obvious. I chose the knight specifically because if you're a chess player, you know that it's kind of the most unconventional piece. It can jump other pieces. It moves in two different directions at once. And it's probably the most recognizable one when you think of a chess board. The silhouette behind it is actually a black monolith, and I don't know if all of you have seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, but being a little bit that's sort of the nerdier part of of the logo, in that movie, throughout it there's this monolith that's present, and people argue about what exactly is or what it means, but it's like this almost like supernatural, super intelligent presence that crosses throughout the history of time in this movie. And so it was just kind of fascinating to me. I'm also a big fan of Mad Men too. There's an episode in Mad Men called The Monolith, and it kind of features that same iconography. So I had thought about some of these concepts, and it, like I said, hand drawn something, and then when I put it together, I'm like, that's it. I'm just going to run with that.
I did not put that much thought into naming my business or the logo. That's fascinating. Wow, that's a lot of thought. Thank you.
Well, I tend to follow these rabbit holes. I know there's not enough time today, but there are a few other side projects that I can't help myself but getting into. So I'm a daydreamer for sure. I've really focused on trying to put a lot of those dreams into action in the last decade. So yeah, there sometimes is some depth to some of those daydreams.
Yeah, but no, that's awesome. Anybody else have any questions? I feel like I've asked 100.
Yeah, Jordan, as far as like kind of how you, I guess, lead with content for clients, is it because you always revert back to television, radio, because that's kind of your background, obviously, or how do you strategize that with even a potential client pitching to them or a current client, their comfortability with it? Just kind of curious how that whole conversation and strategy type of session goes. It's curious to me.
Yeah. You know, I will say that a book that I fall back on, and it was something one of my first bosses at On Media recommended to me, and I've actually I took the book that he gave me and I've given it now to my account manager, Garrett, to read as required reading, is the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I believe it was written in 1994, but it is as relevant as ever. And a lot of the concepts there, you know, competitive concepts or just like creative angles. A lot of times I'll fall back on some of those tools, and there's some that come back frequently. But when it comes to creative content now, the first place I usually look is within their website. If you look at the habits of people now, you know, written content is great and necessary from an SEO standpoint, but to have something that's really polished and plug and play, that someone can go to a website and hit play, and then within maybe a minute or two, learn everything that you want to know in a very concise and like well presented way on a website. That's a lot of times where I want the conversation to begin. So as I'm, you know, talking to these people and trying to help them organize what they feel their brand is and how they exist relative to the local competition, sometimes that's where I'm trying to get them to go, is let's produce that then. You know, obviously the business owner in general, these are dreamers. They really know there's a lot of passion involved in them doing what they do. And so trying to communicate that in a way that they're proud of and that they want to share, and that someone can go to a website and just hit play and be able to absorb, you know, that passion. That's kind of how I go about it.
Oh, that makes sense. So as far as most of your clients have like a TV, radio ad before, and they were like, we need something better coming to you, or is it maybe their first time through that process? And I mean, is there like just a difference in even their comfortability with it? I'm just assuming, just for myself, I'm not a, you know, be in front of the camera type of person. And so I'm just curious how that goes for you.
Yeah, it's definitely a combination of both. And it's funny to me too. I would say in my experience, the people that are more gung-ho to get in front of the camera and think that they're going to be great at it are the worst. The more confidence there as soon as the red light comes on, and I guess there's not even a red light anymore. That's kind of an old school camera, but usually they struggle the most. But yeah, part of that strategy is taking those elements into account. You know, some people do have a prior video or a TV ad. Maybe they're proud of it, maybe they're not. And then others are starting from scratch. I will say that it is a big part of that strategy is trying to script write or storyboard around the capabilities of that client too. There are creative ways to do that. You know, some of it comes down to if they really want to be the spokesperson for their business, but we shoot some ads and they're stiff as a board and look terrified, then maybe we split up that video where they do one line and the rest of it is just their voiceover over B-roll. So there are creative ways to try to get around some of those challenges. But yeah, it's all over the board. I would say in many cases, though, when it comes to what I refer to as long form video, so those, you know, click to play and learn about the business 1 to 2 minute videos, those are usually starting from scratch.
I saw you have one of our investors on video, Brian Rostek.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Brian was a part of CBB for quite a while.
Okay.
And that's how we got connected. We worked on a few other projects together. But yeah, the 2 videos he did, he's definitely an example of somebody who talked the talk and then walked the walk in the video. I thought he did a very good job.
Yes, he did. I saw it on your Facebook page, but I
Yeah.
haven't seen him to tell him that we saw it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to do more videos with him.
Good guy. All right. Anybody else? Okay, so I guess my last question would be, because I always think this is interesting. So you started your business, you have a young family. Do you have a start time and an end time? How do you balance? What does that look like?
Yep. So we got, my wife and I were married in August of 2019, August 2nd. So we're working on 2 years. Our daughter Moira just was 11 months. We hit that milestone this week. Yeah. So the family life has moved fast. When Nicole found out that she was pregnant, it definitely set off some alarm bells in my head that I'm going to need to get some help. And so that was when I hired my first full-time employee, Michelle. I think you had an opportunity to meet her. Her name was Katrina, maybe. That was her name, but I don't know if you met her.
Was she at Loft? I think so.
It was a couple of times, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then she ended up getting a really good opportunity at another company, and that's following that I hired Garrett. But yeah, so that was the preparation process. I needed to find some help there, and I think just becoming more organized and communicating, delegating some of those processes. That's been my biggest challenge right now in this growth phase is everything up to this point. When you're a one-man band, you have your hands in everything. You do everything a certain way. You work with a dozen different businesses in different industries. There are a lot of moving parts. So I'm still working on the delegation, process. But
yeah, but don't you even find that when you're going to help a client, I mean, because that person is so used to doing everything, is it because they have to, or because they don't want to delegate? So I'm assuming that's a benefit to be able to relate to them. It can't be an easy thing for some people to turn over. I'm sure some people are like, oh my God, take this from me now. I can't do this. Please. To the opposite of, you're going to do what? Nah, and giving that up. So yeah,
it definitely helps to be able to tell them that you're in the same boat every day, because definitely, I'm in that phase myself.
Right.
But as far as balance goes, I do try. There's kind of, my wife is an early riser and I'm a night owl. And so the schedule we have right now is her and Moira usually fall asleep in between 8 to 9 o'clock. And then that sometimes I'll use that 9 to 11 p.m. period as my catch-up time down in the home office. Right now, I'm actually in my kitchen, so I thought it was a better backdrop.
Our project. Let you out of the basement.
Yeah, my wife had me do this art project. That was more pleasant than the papers strewn across my house.
Perfect. Well, all good. All good. Anybody? Or go ahead, Brady.
I was gonna say, is the hope, Jordan, then as you continue to grow, is to add more people? I mean, what's your, I guess, 5-10 year vision then for Flanker Media as you can continue to diversify the mix of offerings and know that you're going to continue to add clients, so know that you maybe need an expert in certain things that you can't know it all, right? I'm just curious how you feel you'll grow as your business grows.
Yeah, I would say, I put some goals in front of Garrett when he was hired. I think right now the first one is to try to double our client list using the same kind of strategic process we are now, just with extra help. But I think the actual next step for me that I would envision, even though I really appreciate my video producer freelancer contacts, I think taking video production in-house would make sense. and selling that process. I mean, I think that's kind of a fundamental thing for most campaigns, is having video, you know, in with different kinds of video content available to people. So finding the right person, even if it's one of those current freelancers, if I could somehow pull them in-house, would be ideal. And if that was the case, it would probably necessitate an actual office, because right now, Garrett and I do work primarily remote and then travel to our clients to meet with them. But having an office in a studio to do video production and kind of keeping some of that revenue in-house and offering more regular video production that we could control, I think that is kind of what I envisioned as being the next step.
Makes sense.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate, you know, networking with some new people, and I